what is an emulsifier really? Well, it's nice to know this, as you find emulsifiers in many of the foods we eat, such as bread, biscuits, cakes, margarine, mayonnaise, dressing, and ice cream. Well, let's first look at the word itself, emulsifier. An emulsifying agent is something that is capable of creating an emulsion. And making an emulsion means to mix two liquids that are not themselves capable of binding to each other. You might recognize the expression, to pour oil upon the waters. And you've probably noticed that oil and vinegar won't mix together at all when you make a dressing. But when you stir, you emulsify to mix the two liquids, or rather, to create an emulsion. However, it's on borrowed time, because before long, they will go their separate ways again. This is where the emulsifier comes in. An emulsifier is an ingredient that ensures that water and oil can be mixed together so that the fluids remain evenly distributed in each other. More technically, emulsifiers consist of molecules of a water-loving nature and a fat-loving nature. In this way, the emulsifier acts as a binding agent between the fat and water, in that the molecule will bind both together. But where do we really see an emulsifier being used? Well, for example, in margarine, which is a mixture of fat and water. Without an emulsifier, the water would lie on the outside of the fat. Yuck! And that's not exactly what we want from a margarine. The same is true of ice cream. Here, we can thank emulsifiers for the fact that you can make low-fat ice cream, which tastes great and is nice and creamy to eat. Without emulsifiers, the small air bubbles would disappear, and the ice cream would shrink and probably not be particularly nice. And in bread, emulsifiers improve the bread's freshness. Nice and clever.
One of the things that you really need to be aware of too is the standard Western diet includes an incredible amount and exposure to diet emulsifiers and food additives. There are a couple of them that just to highlight for you, carboxymethylcellulose and polysorbate 80. These are things that are used traditionally in baked goods, and particularly in ice cream and those type of gel products. They are responsible for why we don't have to crank the ice cream anymore and pour rock salt in. Those of you are old enough to remember that. But these are agents that increase the composite taste, or not taste, but the composite perspective of it. They're better perceived on the gut, on the palate. They make it easier to palletize and get a better response as far as fullness in the mouth. But they conversely thin the mucus layer and increase gut permeability. Maltodextrins are things that are also used as thickeners and sweeteners, and these also thin the mucus layer. These are agents that come from plant products, but they're highly refined. And when they're highly refined, they have these adverse effects of thinning mucus layer, increasing gut permeability, and they actually impair intracellular bacteria. And the carrageenans are things that are also used to increase texture, and these are particularly in dairy and sauces. These are made from seaweeds, which sounds pretty healthy, but again, highly processed. They also induce intestinal permeability. So diet emulsifiers and food additives are bad things. So where does this take us? Well, in the current world of inflammatory bowel disease, particularly, I think we need to really have a serious discussion with our patients. We should restrict animal fat, processed foods, and processed carbohydrates. The data are very strong for Crohn's disease. There's a bit of a data gap for ulcerative colitis, but I think the reason to wait for the ulcerative colitis trials to go here, I think it's senseless. These make common sense. There's tremendous emphasis on a translational message now to take this to our patients and start to emphasize things that we push towards plant-based foods.
I think the evidence is interesting that there's so many different things in terms of our diet and products in our diet that we're not even aware of that can affect all of those things. Like some of the thickeners seem to affect the gut lining and permeability issues like carrageenan and xanthan gum and things that are in a lot of health food products.
Right.
So,
and particularly some of the emulsifiers.
Right.
So it's really interesting in terms of ulcerative colitis. There's been some work done in animal studies, very interesting stuff, looking at some of the emulsifiers. So polysorbate 80, some of the other things. And in the mice that were given that incited an inflammatory process in the GI tract of the mice. So just low levels of these emulsifiers. Now, how they're working, what they're doing, is it working through the microbiome? Is it working on the mucin? Is it doing other things? we're not sure, but it's been suggested that those elements may have an important effect on inflammation. And then it's also the issue of increasing permeability, even aside from a GI-specific disease of ulcerative colitis or Crohn's. Is this affecting permeability otherwise because low level of inflammation increases permeability? And so is that the beginning of other diseases as well?
Yeah. So that's fascinating to look at, food components. 'Cause
Right.
most GI docs, I saw Crohn's patients yesterday and they said, my doctor told me there's no connection between food and,
Right.
and I said, well, just logically, if you're eating pounds of a substance every day and putting it in this tube that you're an expert in, why wouldn't you think it would have an impact?
It is amazing that, firstly, that it's taken us this long to recognize the microbiome is important. When, what's sitting right there next to the mucosa, and, same thing, diet. I think many GI docs are now coming around to the view at least that it's important, but still the typical line is it's not important, or if it hurts when you go like this, then don't go like that. So if it hurts when you eat chocolate, don't eat chocolate. But it's obviously more complicated than that.